Welcome to the Teninet Indigenous Wisdom Research Center. I am your host, Author Teninet Setegn. In this broadcast series, we explore the profound mysteries within our research. Ethiopian esoteric philosophy and alchemy. Our journey into channeling hidden wisdom begins now.
What if I told you that the strict rules you're setting for yourself?
Right, the ones meant to make you a quote-unquote better person.
Yeah, exactly. What if those rules are actually the exact things keeping you trapped? I mean, just imagine it. You set this rigid new rule for yourself.
Like a brutal new diet.
Right, or maybe a vow to never check your work email on the weekends. Or just a promise to stop losing your temper with your family. You draw this line in the sand, and you try your absolute hardest to stay on the right side of it.
But inevitably, because you're human, you slip up.
Yeah, you cross the line, and the moment you do, you're just hit with this crushing, suffocating weight of guilt. You feel like a total failure.
It's a devastating cycle. And, almost every single person listening to this right now has experienced it. We set a standard, we fail to meet it, and then we internalize that failure.
You really do.
It stops being about a simple misstep, and it morphs into this fundamental flaw in our character. We carry that heavy baggage into the next day, the next week, sometimes for our entire lives.
You just constantly feel like you're in debt to your own bad habits, like you're always playing catch-up, trying to appease this internal judge. Well, today's deep dive into the source material is going to completely dismantle that cycle. We are looking at a framework that totally flips the script on how we view rules, guilt, and what it actually means to master yourself.
It really does. The concepts we're unpacking today offer a profound departure from, traditional morality and the typical ways we think about personal failing. It is just a completely different paradigm for human consciousness.
Totally. And to really do this justice, we need to lay down where this paradigm is actually coming from. So today's deep dive is based on some truly groundbreaking primary research coming out of the Teninet Indigenous Wisdom Research Center.
Which is doing some incredible work.
Oh, absolutely. This broadcast is actually an official project of the center, and we're going to be exploring the foundational work of its founder, Author Teninet Setegn. The frameworks he's developed, they just completely challenge the standard operating procedures of the human mind.
They really do. And to get specific, we are going to immerse ourselves in the teachings of a framework called Addmesh.
Right, Addmesh.
Yeah, it's this comprehensive spiritual and philosophical system that explores how human beings can achieve ultimate liberation. And we'll be drawing heavily from author Teninet Setegn's seminal work, The Book of Taibeb.
And Taibeb translates to wisdom, right?
Exactly. Taibeb means wisdom. So our primary mission today is to unpack what's known as the fourth core principle of Addmesh. This principle outlines the actual mechanics of how wisdom lifts humans out of bondage through two very specific, distinct forces, freedom and victory.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to even begin to understand this fourth core principle, we kind of have to start by looking at the walls of the cage. We have to talk about rules. Author Teninet Setegn describes this as the trap of the law.
And that really is the necessary starting point. In the teachings of Addmesh, there's a fundamental critique of the very nature of traditional laws and rules. If you think about the architecture of a rule, it requires a specific dynamic.
Like a hierarchy.
Right. If there is a law, there must be a lawmaker. And whoever or whatever creates and enforces that law inherently functions as your ruler.
That makes total sense. The lawmaker sets the boundary and holds the power to punish you if you cross it.
Yeah, and that power dynamic creates a psychological trap. When a human being is living under a law, even a law designed with the best intentions, meant to keep them safe or enforce moral goodness, they aren't actually operating as a free agent.
They're just following orders.
Exactly. They are, by definition, a subservient subject. Their daily existence is reduced to this terrible, high-stakes binary choice.
Right. On one hand, they can begrudgingly obey a rule they don't organically want to follow, just suppressing their own desires out of fear.
Yeah, and on the other hand, they can break the rule and face an agonizing internal moral crisis.
Plus whatever external punishment the ruler doles out.
Precisely.
So the argument here is that just by existing underneath a rigid set of rules, you are already living in a state of captivity. You're a subject to the law, which means you've surrendered your sovereignty.
You've surrendered it entirely. And this brings us to a radical redefinition within Addmesh. It's their concept of sin.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
Right. Because if you look at most traditional structures, sin is viewed purely as a legal violation. It's binary. You broke rule number 4, therefore you committed a sin.
A tally mark goes on your permanent record. It's
Yeah.
like an accounting system of your moral failures.
Like a cosmic rap sheet that just gets longer and longer the older you get.
Yeah, exactly.
But Addmesh approaches this from an entirely different angle. In this framework, sin is not a legal violation at all. It's not about a broken rule.
Right.
Instead, sin is defined simply as something ruling over a person. It is a state of bondage.
Wait, so just the state of being ruled?
Exactly. If a sudden craving, an irrational fear, or even a strict external law is dictating your actions and overriding your ability to make a sovereign choice, that state of being ruled is what sin is.
Wow. That completely changes the framing.
Mm-hmm.
It takes the focus off the action itself and puts it entirely on who or what is in the driver's seat of your consciousness in that moment.
And the implications of that shift are just massive. Because sin is defined as a current active state of bondage rather than, a permanent ledger of legal violations, Addmesh introduces this profoundly liberating concept. It does not count past or hereditary sins.
Hold on, let's hover on that for a second. It just completely rejects the idea of carrying the baggage of the past.
It rejects the very premise that you are eternally tethered to your previous states of bondage.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Because in so many traditions, you inherit the guilt of your ancestors, or you're just permanently stained by your own past mistakes. You carry that way forward, and it dictates your future worth.
Right. But Addmesh argues that if a person makes a choice that puts them in bondage, a choice that does not bring them freedom, they shouldn't take on permanent condemnation. The focus is exclusively on the present moment.
So you just let it go.
Yeah. If you realize you're a subject, your only obligation is to recognize the bondage and make a choice that gives you freedom moving forward.
You're telling me we can just drop that crushing weight of guilt we talked about in the very beginning, just set it down and walk away?
The philosophy demands that you drop it. Punishing yourself for yesterday's lack of freedom does nothing but keep you in bondage today. Guilt itself becomes a ruler.
Wow. Guilt is the ruler.
Exactly. To achieve true liberation, you must sever the tie to past condemnation and focus entirely on breaking the current state of subservience.
I mean, I love the optimism of that, the idea of a constantly renewing clean slate. But I have to push back a little here because my practical brain is flashing warning signs.
Sure, let's hear it.
Isn't law necessary on some level? If we just tell everyone, hey, rules are bondage, you don't have to carry any guilt for breaking them, wouldn't society just devolve into absolute chaos?
That's a fair question.
I think about it like teaching a child about a hot stove. You teach them a very strict rule, do not touch the stove. You don't make them carry the hereditary guilt of touching the stove forever, but you absolutely enforce the rule so they don't burn their hand off. The rule is required to keep them alive.
That is a crucial distinction to make. And the Addmesh framework doesn't ignore the developmental reality of human beings. Scaffolding is necessary when you're building a house, much like your hot stove example.
Right.
The critique isn't that avoiding a hot stove is a bad idea. The dysfunction occurs when the fear of the stove, or the terrifying, unyielding command of the parent who set the rule, becomes the absolute dictator of that person's consciousness long after they've grown up.
Ah, I see. So the problem isn't the boundary itself. The problem is getting stuck in the phase where you need an external force to threaten you into respecting the boundary.
Exactly. An external law can certainly point you away from immediate danger, but it fundamentally fails to transform your inner nature. It just molds you into a compliant subject who acts out of self-preservation and, well, fear of punishment.
Just try not to get in trouble.
Right. True freedom, in the Addmesh sense, isn't about rebelling and pressing your hand against the hot stove just to prove you aren't a subject to the rule. That's just another form of bondage.
Being ruled by the need to rebel.
Exactly. True freedom is understanding the thermodynamic reality of the stove so completely and mastering your own movements so thoroughly that you navigate around the kitchen naturally by your own sovereign choice without ever needing a ruler to threaten you.
That distinction between chaotic rebellion and actual mastery is fascinating, but it begs a massive question. If sin is just this state of being ruled and relying on traditional laws doesn't actually set us free or transform our nature, how on earth does a person practically move from being a slave to their desires to being the master of?
It's the ultimate question.
Because, I mean, I can't just snap my fingers and stop craving the things I know are bad for me.
Right. The transition from subject to sovereign is the core journey of this philosophy. To really grasp the mechanics of how this shift occurs, we should look at a brilliant narrative provided by author Teninet Setegn. The Book of Taibeb contains a powerful story that illustrates this exact evolution of consciousness perfectly.
Oh, the story of the child and the sugar. Yes. I was really hoping we would dive into this. It's such a visceral way to understand this paradigm shift. Let me set the scene for the first half of the story.
Go for it.
Okay, so according to the Book of Taibeb, there's this little boy who has an absolute obsession with sugar. He just loves it. But his mother has strictly forbidden him from eating it straight from the container. So the external law is established.
The lawmaker has spoken.
The boundary is drawn, and the boy is now operating under the jurisdiction of that rule. So one afternoon, the mother leaves the house and the boy is left completely alone in the kitchen.
The physical enforcer is gone.
Exactly. But the internal thought of the sugar immediately takes over his brain. It becomes this like gravitational pull. He's agonizing over it, caught in this painful tug of war between the terror of breaking the rule and the overwhelming physical craving for the sugar.
A total state of conflict.
Right. And eventually the craving overpowers his fear. He sneaks over to the container, eats a handful of sugar, and the moment he does, the dopamine hit is instantly replaced by intense, paralyzing guilt.
Of course.
When the mother comes home, she takes one look at his guilty face, knows exactly what he did, and punishes him.
It paints a perfect tragic picture of the cycle of law, temptation, violation, and punishment. I mean, look at the boy's internal state in that kitchen. He is entirely a subject.
In every way.
First, he's a subject to his mother's law. He fears her wrath. Second, he's a subject to his own biological craving. He cannot resist the urge. He possesses zero agency in this scenario.
He is completely in bondage.
Yeah.
He is living in what Addmesh defines as sin, being ruled over by these conflicting forces.
Right.
But the genius of the story is the time jump.
Yeah, the narrative skips forward decades. That same terrified little boy is now a fully grown man. He has his own life, his own career, and he's traveled back to his hometown to visit his mother. They're sitting together at the kitchen table drinking coffee, and the grown man casually reaches out and scoops up a spoonful of sugar to stir into his cup.
Right in front of the original lawmaker, he's doing the exact thing that used to be a crime.
And as he does it, he looks at his mother and delivers an incredibly profound realization. He says, quote, "In the past, I used to take sugar having the thought of sugar ruled over me. Now I still eat the sugar, but this time I am ruling over it."
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if you were to take a photograph of the physical action, it is identical. In both timelines, a human hand is moving sugar into a mouth. An outside observer wouldn't see any difference in the mechanics of the event.
Not at all.
But the internal reality, the architecture of the man's mind is just universes apart.
And that invisible transformation is the entire point of the teaching. The physical reality of the sugar didn't change, but the man's consciousness evolved completely. As a child, eating the sugar was an act of agonizing submission to a craving that had hunted him down and overpowered him. As a man, he's no longer terrified of his mother's external law, nor is he a slave to a biological urge. He decides to sweeten his coffee from a place of absolute sovereignty.
It makes me think of driving a car.
Oh, how so?
Well, when you're a little kid, a car is this massive, incomprehensible machine that dictates exactly where you're going. You're just strapped into the back seat, completely at the mercy of the machine and whoever is steering it. The car is the master of your journey.
Right, you have no say.
But when you grow up, you study how the engine works, you practice steering, you learn the rules of the road, and eventually you control the machine, you turn the key, you press the gas, and you decide the destination.
I like that.
The car didn't suddenly become a different object, you know?
Yeah.
You still have four wheels and an engine. The only thing that changed was your mastery over it.
The car analogy maps perfectly onto the sugar story. True freedom isn't found in permanently locking the sugar away in a vault so you can never be tempted by it again. That's just creating a more extreme law.
Just building a thicker cage.
Exactly. True freedom is engaging in the hard work of elevating your internal state so that you can hold the sugar in your hand, feel the desire, and remain completely in control of what happens next. You decide whether to consume it or put it back, without fear and without compulsion.
Living with that level of agency just sounds like the ultimate goal of human development.
Yeah.
I mean, who wouldn't want to navigate the world from the driver's seat, totally immune to the chaotic pull of their own fears and desires?
Everyone wants that.
Right. But this brings us right to the practical application. How does a person actually get there? What is the bridge between the terrified kid hiding in the kitchen and the sovereign adult enjoying his coffee?
And this is where we finally arrive at the mechanics of the fourth core principle of Addmesh. Everything we've unpacked so far, the oppressive nature of laws, the redefinition of sin as bondage, dropping the weight of the past, the story of the sugar, all of it is the required foundation to understand how this principle operates in practice.
The principle being that wisdom gives the human being freedom and victory to lift them out of bondage.
Yes. And we must examine those two specific outcomes, freedom and victory, very carefully. Within the Addmesh framework, they aren't interchangeable buzzwords. They represent two distinct sequential halves of the journey toward ultimate self-mastery.
Okay, let's isolate the first half then. How does author Teninet Setegn define freedom in this specific context?
In Addmesh, freedom is essentially synonymous with revelation. It's the initial paradigm-shattering moment of breaking out of your subservient mindset.
Like an awakening.
Exactly. It is a sudden shift in spiritual consciousness that allows a person to see the truth of their situation and perceive the invisible realities that were previously obscured by their own ignorance.
It's like waking up and suddenly realizing you've been living in a cage your whole life. You see the bars for the first time.
That's it, perfectly. When you're deep in bondage, when you're blindly ruled by a habit and anxiety or the desperate need to comply with an external law, your vision is incredibly restricted.
Right, you can't see the big picture.
You operate in a state of tunnel vision, only seeing the immediate craving you need to satisfy or the immediate punishment you need to avoid. Freedom is the revelation that lifts that veil. You suddenly understand the mechanics of your own mind.
You see the external forces trying to manipulate you.
Yes. The revelation itself is the realization, quote, I am currently a subject, but I do not have to remain one.
That is a staggering moment of clarity.
Mm.
But just having a realization doesn't magically fix the problem, does it? I mean, seeing the bars of the cage doesn't make them disappear.
Which is why the fourth core principle insists that freedom alone is insufficient. Once you experience that revelation, once you attempt to rise to what Addmesh calls the highest rank of honor, a state of true sovereignty, you are going to collide with massive resistance.
Because the neural pathways of your old habits are still there. The craving for the sugar doesn't just evaporate because you had an epiphany over coffee.
The resistance is fierce and multifaceted. You will confront deep-seated internal barriers, profound laziness, ingrained jealousy, negligence, and just a relentless stream of never-ending desires.
Your own biology is fighting you.
Your biology and psychology will fight to pull you back into the comfort of being a subject. And you'll also face external challenges, systems, structures, even other people who benefit from you remaining compliant and predictable.
So how do you beat that?
Overcoming that massive wall of resistance is where victory comes in. Victory is the mastery, the active daily exertion of will required to break through those barriers.
So what does this all mean? If freedom is the architectural blueprint of a new life, victory is the back-breaking labor of actually pouring the concrete and swinging the hammers.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
It's like deciding to redirect the flow of a river. Freedom is standing on the bank, realizing the water is flooding your crops, and figuring out where the new channel needs to go.
Right.
But victory is getting in the mud with a shovel day after day, digging the new trench, fighting the current, and forcing the water to flow where you want it to. You have to build the muscle to move the earth.
A fantastic visualization of the struggle. What Author Teninet Setegn structures here is a symbiotic relationship. You cannot achieve mastery without both elements working in tandem.
Makes sense.
If you possess freedom, the revelation of your bondage, but you fail to cultivate victory, you just devolve into a miserable, frustrated observer of your own captivity.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It is. You know you're trapped, you know you're making bad choices, but you haven't built the strength to override the inertia of your habits.
You just watch yourself eat the sugar and hate yourself for it, but with a higher vocabulary.
Precisely the danger. You must engage in the active struggle to achieve victory. And, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this pairing of freedom and victory is the ultimate mission of the Teninet Indigenous Wisdom Research Center.
The center isn't just publishing philosophy. They're trying to provide the shovel to dig the trench.
Exactly. The intention behind author Teninet Setegn's work isn't merely to entertain people with novel spiritual concepts. The goal is to actively guide human beings to a state where they transcend the need to blindly follow spiritual laws or avoid hot stoves out of a primitive fear of punishment.
They want actual transformation.
The objective is to elevate humanity to a state of operation defined by universal revelation, a concept Addmesh refers to as Mela Megalit.
Mela Megalit. What does that translate to in practical terms for someone trying to live this out?
It implies a state of full, comprehensive illumination. It's a level of consciousness where you are perfectly aligned with universal truths, meaning you are no longer making choices based on the friction of resisting temptation or fearing a lawmaker. You're operating from a place of pure, unfiltered mastery.
A state where you are unequivocally ruling your own thoughts.
Where you are no longer a subject to anything. Not the trauma of your past, not the anxiety of your future, not the rigid laws of your society, and not the chaotic cravings of your own body.
Wow.
It's the ability to scoop the sugar, hold it in your hand, and declare with absolute truth, I am ruling over it. That is what Addmesh defines as the highest rank of honor a human being can attain.
It is really difficult to overstate what a massive paradigm shift this is. We're talking about fundamentally rewiring how we interact with our own shortcomings. We're taking the terrifying, heavily moralized concept of sin and just completely neutralizing it.
Completely.
It goes from being a permanent stain on your soul to a simple, observable state of, just being ruled by something in this specific moment.
It strips all the toxic shame out of the equation and replaces it entirely with actionable agency.
Yes. Replacing shame with agency.
Yeah.
I love that. You drop the heavy baggage of hereditary guilt. You stop trying to appease an invisible lawmaker.
Right.
And instead, using the framework developed by author Teninet Setegn, you pursue wisdom. You use that wisdom to achieve the freedom of seeing the invisible forces trying to control you, and you build the victory of actually mastering those forces.
Yeah.
You evolve from the terrified child hiding in the kitchen to the sovereign adult holding the spoon.
It demands an incredibly high level of sustained spiritual consciousness. But as the Book of Tebeb so clearly outlines, it is the only authentic path to true, lasting liberation. As we conclude this deep dive into these profound sources, the material leaves us with a necessary challenge to reflect on.
Ooh, leave us with a provocative thought to chew on. I'm ready.
Think carefully about the shush in your own life right now. What is that one specific habit, desire, or fear that currently dictates your actions? The thing you hide from others? The thing that makes you feel perpetually guilty, or the thing you try to suppress with rigid, unforgiving rules?
We all have one.
We do. If true freedom isn't found in locking that sugar away in a vault forever, but in fundamentally changing your own consciousness so that you rule it, well, what is one specific action you can take today to stop being the subject and start being the master?
Wow. That is the perfect challenge to leave on. Stop being the subject, start being the master. You don't have to carry the guilt of touching the hot stove forever. You just have to do the work to master the kitchen. Oh. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep seeking those aha moments, and we will catch you next time as we keep unpacking the most fascinating sources shaping our world.